Hey y'all, it's your girl Hope, your TV movie bestie, and I watch good shit. And I just got done watching the last episode of Love Story, JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. And y'all, I am broken. Whew. Oh, I'm so glad this show over with because I can't take another heartbreak. Okay, y'all, let's get into episode 9. So we start with John and Carolyn. They're in therapy. Their therapist is like, I recommend a trial separation for y'all. And so they're like, what? Which is odd to me because they're already kind of living separate. Like they're still kind of sort of talking, but they're not really around each other anymore. And so I would think it would be very easy for them to do a trial separation. But, they're like, well, how long are you talking about? Like 1 or 2 weeks? And she's like, no, like 1 or 2 months. And they're like, whoa, nah, we can't do that. And John's like, I can't leave my wife for 2 months. And Carolyn's like, yeah, I can't not talk to John for 2 months. And she's like, well, what y'all gonna do? Because y'all not really together. Y'all won't leave each other. And you won't even try a trial separation. And she said, I think a trial separation would be good because it would allow you to see what it's really like to live without the other one. And then perhaps you could appreciate what you really have and then try to work on it and fix it. They're just like, no, we ain't gonna do that. So they leave therapy, they go day drinking, they're having a moment, they're reminiscing about the good old days, the good times. John is like, can I come over? She says, sure. He comes over and they start kissing and, they end up having sex. They're really connecting. It seems like if just for a brief moment, they have found their way back to one another. But then the morning comes and John is getting ready for work. He's going on about his day. Carolyn comes downstairs and she's in the reality of like, yeah, we had a great night. Sex is not our problem. Like, we need to deal with our real issues. And John is like, all right, well, I got to go to work. And Carolyn's like, I thought we would maybe talk. And he's like, about what? What? And she's like, I don't know, last night. And he's like, yeah, last night was great. And she's like, so you're just like, okay, like, and he's like, maybe we can just talk about this later. Cause she's like, well, maybe we should talk to the therapist about this. And he's like, well, we're not going to tell her that we slept together, right? She's like, what? And he said, well, she told us to separate and we literally did not separate. So maybe we don't tell her. And Carolyn's like, John, are you trying to get a gold star in therapy or are you trying to save our marriage? And he's like, I just don't want her to think less of us than she already does. And it's kind of like, John, therapy works, but you got to do the work. And you have to be truthful. Like, you can't lie to your therapist. Your therapist can't help you if they don't know what the problem is. So Carolyn's like, John, I love you, but you still do not get it. He's just like, can we talk about this later? And she's like, yeah, it's fine. So he goes on about his day. He meets with Caroline. He's just like, she is never going to forgive me for making her give up her life, losing her anonymity. Like, and I don't know what I can do to fix it. Like, I've tried and nothing seems to work. Caroline is just like, John, like, you have dated a lot of women and you never fell in love like you are with Carolyn. And she's like, all of her fire and her refusal to conform, you used to love all that. And now it's a problem. And she's like, and the only reason it's a problem is because she's asking you to do things that you've never had to do before. Are you willing to do those things for her for the sake of your marriage or what? He's kind of just like, oh no. In the meantime, Carolyn, she is also meeting with her sister. And shout out to sisters because y'all the real MVPs. Sisters and women that we consider our sisters. Like, y'all the real MVPs. She's meeting with her sister. Her sister's like, I talked to John. He called the other day. And she's like, and what did you say? And she said, he asked about you and I told him he need to call you himself. Last night, we had sex. It was great. And then today he just went on to work like nothing was wrong. And she's like, he just does not get it. And her sister is like, well, did you say we need to stay and talk? Like, don't go into work today. And she said, no, I'm tired of asking him to do all this stuff. She said, well, then I guess you wasn't too concerned about communicating and getting to the source of y'all problem. And so she's like, Carolyn, I've got to stop taking stuff out on John that it's not his fault. Like, you're projecting things, your dad left, you're projecting that on John, and John can't help that. That has nothing to do with him. You need to suck up your pride. You need to get over this. I need to be right and do what's best for your marriage. Carolyn's like, I'm tired of compromising. I always compromise for him, and that's all I've been doing. Lauren is like, well, it's not really compromise unless you do it willingly. And, she's like, if you are forced to do it, then it's not a compromise. Only what you want to do. She's just like, you can't hold on to the past and still move forward. And that hit Carolyn. And she's like, okay. John, he sends her a beautiful orchid arrangement. And he writes her this note that says, even though we can't go back to what we used to be, it doesn't mean we can't have what we want. And he says, meet me at the beginning. Love, John. It's like an homage to their first date. So she shows up at the restaurant and he's there and she's like, oh, you early? Because remember, on their first date, he was extremely late. And so he said, yeah, I showed up early because if you decide to leave, I wouldn't be able to catch you. And so they start talking, you talk about that first date. And Carolyn starts really opening up to him. Like, because they talked about what kind of sign they had over their head. And so his was about, he has this image of who he's supposed to be, and he doesn't know if he can be that or even if he wants to be that. He said, you never told me what your sign was. And she said, I don't tell anybody what my sign is. And she says, my sign is that I don't want to have this tough exterior that I always have. I'm always scared of letting people fully in. And she said, I met you, I fell in love with you, and I wanted all that to go away. And she said, I just wanted to be I want to be loved. I want to be nurtured. I want to be taken care of. And she was like, that's really all that I wanted from you. But I was scared to, finally let you in. John is like, Carolyn, I love you. That's all I want. She says, well, how do we know that we're not going to hurt each other? And he says, we don't. All that we know is that we want to try, and we go from there. And so she's like, okay. So they end their date. He walks her home and they're talking about this upcoming wedding that's happening in Martha's Vineyard. And he says, don't worry about it. Because she said, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. And he says, don't worry about it. I know you don't want to go. You don't have to go. Caroline's not even going. I'm just going to go do it and get it over with. She says, no, I'll go. And he's like, you really don't have to. And she says, no, I want to go. And she says, I miss dancing with you. And he says, I miss dancing with you too. So they kiss, and they make plans to go to the wedding. So Lauren is also going to go because she's getting dropped off somewhere. Caroline gets her dress, she gets her nails done, and they get on that plane. They take that damn flight. They're flying, and at first, Carolyn and Lauren are sitting together in the back, and John's just driving up front. She says, I'm going to go up there and sit with him. So she goes, she sits with them. They start talking. They're holding hands, and it's just so sweet. And we see the John and Carolyn that we've fallen in love with this whole season. And it's for a moment, they're who they really want to be, and they just get to be them. It's getting cloudy. It's very dark. And John is losing a visual sight. Then he starts getting disoriented. And Carolyn is like, just breathe. That's her go-to with him whenever he's flustered. She always just tells him to breathe, breathe, and she calms him down. All the red signals are going off on the plane, so they know that something is wrong. But again, he's just disoriented and he really doesn't know like how to navigate. She just like holds his hand, and her and Lauren just close their eyes. And because I always have a soundtrack playing in my head, cue Alanis Morissette, Ironic, and I thought, and as the plane crashed down, he thought, well, isn't that nice? And isn't it ironic? Don't you think? So next day they get a urgent call from like the radio Coast Guard or whatever. They say that their plane is down. They haven't arrived. Word starts getting out. They start telling the family. They tell Caroline. They tell Lauren and Caroline's mother. Everybody's starting to hear the rumblings. And so they're watching it on TV. They're seeing it. And finally, of course, they say, we've discovered the plane, their bodies, all of that. Woo! Caroline, this hits her like a ton of bricks because she lost her dad, she lost her mom, and now she's lost her brother. And it's just her. Just the magnitude of the loss is so powerful. And shout out to Grace Gummer, who plays her, which I just found out is Meryl Streep's daughter, like one of her daughters. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because I adore Meryl Streep. And also, once I knew that that was her mom, I looked at her and I was like, I can't unsee it. Yes, she looks just like Meryl Streep, and also her father. She does this beautiful monologue of how don't say another word. When they get the word that they're gone, she's like, don't speak. Just don't say anything. And she's like, I cannot take anything that you're about to say. Don't say anything. And, her husband is like, Caroline, and she's like, don't say it. And she just, breaks down and she's like crying. And she's like, it doesn't make sense. How can he be gone? He was just here. And I am crying my eyes out. It took me about an hour and a half to watch this one episode because I kept crying. And I was like, stop. I had to pause it like, y'all. Whew. I was like Viola Davis in Fences, ugly crying, snot, and like, I'm still stuffy. Oh my gosh. Okay. Anyways, so it happens and Caroline, she can't even face Caroline and Lauren's mother. So she comes and Ed, he's the spokesperson for the family. And he presents two options to her for burial. And he says, President Clinton has said that he can get buried in Arlington National Cemetery with his father and his mother. But if they want to get buried together, then they suggest that they get buried in the Kennedy family cemetery. And she's like, and that's in Massachusetts. And so she said, why would I have my daughter buried in Massachusetts, a state she has no ties to? And she's like, and that's it? Like, I got those two options or nothing? Ed says, of course you can do whatever you want to do with Carolyn, but if you would like them together, these are the options. She's just like, the audacity of y'all. And she said, and you just keep saying, Carolyn. I have two children who were killed in that plane crash that he caused. And it's like, Lord, because, yes, we're thinking about Carolyn, and it's like, no, she had two daughters, Carolyn and Lauren, and she's doubly grieving. And it's just, ooh. So then she goes to their apartment and she sees the bouquet of flowers that John gave Carolyn. And, she's just standing there and she's like smelling a blanket or something that belongs to Carolyn. She's crying. And then in walks Caroline. And so they just like sit across the table from one another and they just share their grief. Mom, she is just going through like, I've lost two daughters. One daughter they don't even talk about in the news. The other daughter, she's the shadow of your brother. And she's like, my child will always be remembered like this. They don't get to be who they could have been. I don't get to rewrite their narrative. Like, it's just going to be the wife of, And then, yeah, her sister. And she's like, it is just a lot. Caroline, she is like, I get it. And she said, people my whole life, they've been saying, sorry for your loss. And she said, I hate that. And she's heard it so much, it just has become meaningless to her. And she's like, but I sit here with you, and that's all I want to say to you. And she says, I didn't know Lauren very well. And she said, but I know that she was smart and she was talented and she was pretty. She meant a lot to Carolyn. And she said, but I did know Carolyn. Fortunately, I knew that Carolyn was struggling. I knew that she needed support. She needed some kind of help, a friend maybe. And she said, I will always regret that I did not be those things for her. And I thought that was really big of Caroline because, for so long they had kind of clashed, and it just, for her to accept ownership of that was really powerful. And I think it helped for her mom to hear that. All this talk about the burial and all this. And she said, I'm remembering a conversation I had with John once, and he told me that he wanted to be cremated. And she said, I was wondering if you would like to have Carolyn and Lauren's ashes spread out with John's, and we could do it together as one. And so she's kind of like, yeah, that would be nice. And so they hug, kind of have a sentimental moment together, because grief just ties us all together. And something that Caroline says I thought was really powerful. She said, I'm not a person who usually lets people get really close to me. And she said, partly I do it because I think the less people I have in my circle, the less people I inevitably have to say goodbye to. And I was like, oh, that is so sad. Like, do not be closed because you're afraid of losing people. Like, grief is terrible and it sucks and it comes in waves, but it's the price we pay for loving people. And I just think that it's better to love and lose than to not love at all. So I hated hearing that from her, but I thought it was really powerful. Then it's right before the memorial service, and Mrs. Kennedy, their aunt, she comes in. And so she's talking to Caroline, and she says, I know I'm not a Kennedy by blood. And she says, but we are a lot alike. She says that we don't like pity, and we don't like pity because we don't want it to define us. And she says, we are Kennedy women, and we are resilient, we're strong, and we're still here. And that has to mean something. And so she says to Carolyn that, she knows that she is probably going to want to retreat now even more because, Caroline, she kind of stays out of the public eye. And she says, but grief will always stay with you. But it's your relationship with grief that changes. You get to choose how you want to deal with your grief. And you can let it hold you back, or you can decide to move on. Caroline is like, yeah, that's true. And so they go to the service, and Carolyn's mother, she gets up and she reads this poem. Y'all, jeez. So she reads, I wrote this down because I looked it up. I love quotes. And I just cried and cried and cried as she was reading this poem. So she reads this poem that's called Death is Nothing at All by Henry Scott Holland. It's beautiful. And it just talks about how I didn't die, and like nothing has changed. Everything that we are to one another, we still are. And that's how you should go on and live your life, as if nothing has happened. They have the memorial service. After the memorial service, they go and distribute the ashes. And while they're distributing the ashes, another poem is being read by Anne. And that poem is called Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep by Claire Harner. And that also is very beautiful. And it just says, basically like, don't cry for me because I'm not gone. I'm in the birds chirping. I'm in the wind blowing. I'm in the sun shining. I'm in the snow glistening, that, I'm always with you, even though I'm no longer physically with you. And I just wept. It was so beautiful. They just, distribute their ashes, and then the episode ends with John and Carolyn laying on the beach, cuddled up, relaxing, and then we see the ocean waves and it goes off. So, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Everybody who was involved with this show, this was amazing. Like, I love this show. Hard to say this is my favorite show because I am also watching Paradise. And if you don't watch Paradise, you should be watching that and then watch all my videos about that as well. But definitely top 5 favorite shows that I have been watching this month. I have loved this show. I thought it was beautifully written. The script, the dialogue has been beautiful. The actors are amazing. So this has been a great show. I am glad it's over because my heart needs a break. But it's been a beautiful ride. So I hope y'all have enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed my commentary. I've enjoyed chatting with y'all about it. So until the next Ryan Murphy amazing story, I will see y'all later. Bye, besties.